Dr. Mchangizi here with your Science Moment. Today, let's make it a contest between two different kinds of countries that one might imagine. In one, you have rule of law, you've got a constitution like that in the United States, you have balance of powers between various different kinds of federal governments. You may have federalism, so states have their own states' rights. You have all those kinds of structures in place that we love in the United States, and we think it's key for why we're an independent, free, prosperous nation for all of these years. And on the other side, then, you have a monarchy or a dictatorship. But in this case, we're going to say or posit that the people, the culture of those, the populace there, are incredibly individualistic and rugged individuals and have a spirit of classical liberalism where they appreciate free expression, they appreciate individual rights, and it's part of their bones. It would never occur to them that they have the right or the authority to tell other people that they should do this for the good of the whole and those sorts of things. They have a fundamental constraint that they're not allowed to do that. Now, I certainly would like the best of both worlds, where you have a populace that is steeped in their bones in the ideas of individual liberties and civil rights. But I've come to a different kind of weighting of these values through the process of going through this COVID mass hysteria over the last 1.5 years. I think what we've realized is that, sure, we would like to live in a country that has these balance of powers, these constitutional structures, these structures that help keep these balances. But really, the most dangerous thing that affects societies isn't the dictatorship that comes and top-down controls everything, which is, of course, does happen. It is a worry. But just as dangerous, and I think potentially more dangerous, is when these mass hysterias come through and suddenly all of those checks, all of those balances of power don't mean anything, because at every single stage, every single watchdog which is watching this one, and there's a watchdog for that one and so forth, it doesn't matter. They're all in an echo chamber, they're all believing and saying the exact same things, and emergency powers are even if emergency powers aren't declared, it doesn't really matter. It just sweeps through, and they all start doing the same thing, and they start violating civil rights en masse. They start engaging in sudden behaviors which change the nature of how things are running, and you typically will have raised excess mortality, as we've seen for the last 1.5 years. The more important thing, in my opinion, I think we've all seen this, is that the populace, the culture of the populace, should have in their bones the idea of individual rights and free expression as part and parcel of what makes a society like ours work. If you don't have that, if you just have the structures, the balance of powers, that means nothing, because when the most dangerous thing sweeps through, and if these brains individually don't feel there's such a thing as a constraint, that there's such a thing as civil rights on them, on telling what others to do, well, it just sweeps right through. The most important thing is to get the next generation steeped that you don't have the right to tell others what to do. If someone may disagree with your opinion, that's okay. You can't tell them to be censored. You don't report them. That's the stuff that's the most embarrassing stuff if you were to be found to do that kind of thing. But that's not the attitude we have. We have one entire side of this debate that if you discuss things with them on Twitter, for example, they'll immediately say, I'm going to report you. Now imagine that. In mind, that's just the most humiliating thing. I would never, this is like a snitch-like behavior. But they proudly will tell you this. And there's whole nations. I mean, in the United States, at least some 50% of the population potentially agrees and believes in free expression, at least. But there's other nations where it's just completely foreign to them. If we don't fight for these fundamental notions of that you have individual rights and you cannot tread on those folks, then these mass hysterias are much more likely to flow through and completely overturn society. I've talked about in earlier videos about being aloof. That was one, and we've talked about other kinds of things that one can do that might insulate one so that one doesn't, these hysterias don't spread. But another one is just simply that there should be we call it a deontological constraint in philosophy. You should just have everybody in their brains just say, no, I'm not allowed to do that. I and us are not allowed to go coercively force those people to do that. And if everybody had that kind of fundamental constraint in their brains, then even if they wanted, they said, gosh, I'm so afraid of this pandemic, and we really ought to do lockdowns, which don't work. But you believe that you believe all of the stuff that they've been saying, but if you had this one thought that I'm not allowed to do that to other people, it would have stopped. this hysteria wouldn't have gone through, because as much as you would have believed it was the most dangerous thing ever and that all these interventions would work, you would say, well, I'm not allowed to do that. That's the kind of thing that's missing, and it was completely missing across the board, and it's one of the reasons why the mass hysteria happened as quickly as it happened. And it's the kind of thing that keeps happening, and it's what undergirds totalitarianism, is the feeling that for the sake of the good or the safety of society, we have to fight this evil infection, and there's no constraint on oneself as to that one's not allowed to do that. Appreciation of civil rights, appreciations of free expression, which is part of this, are all something that must be done at the individual level. Each individual must be taught, the next generation must be taught how important these things are, or will always succumb to these sorts of hysterias. And that was your science moment.